as you get better, let's just put it that way, as you get better, as you improve, as your openings evolve, you begin to start thinking about strategic plans combined with your opening ideas. So, first of all, I'd like to ask, how many of you are E4 players? One E4 and one D4 players. And how many of you just play both? Universal? Okay, that's power to you who can do that. When I was starting to play chess, essentially I didn't have so much strategic ideas as so much as I was responding to tactics. You know, like my opponent would make a tactical possibility, I saw a trap, I would avoid it, and so forth and so on. And I didn't really understand strategic play, and certainly I didn't understand the idea of combining a strategic plan with the opening I chose. So in other words, let's say I played one E4, and if my opponent answered in kind one E5, I went after the guy on F7 and, you know, checkmate. And if I didn't check my opponent on F7, I probably lost. But that was like my feeling about E4, that after E5 I could go after my opponent's pawn. So that was basically my strategic understanding of chess, which wasn't very good. And as I kept playing as a religion E4, why I say as a religion? Well, because I was told Bobby Fischer said E4, one E4, best by test. Great, so I wanted to play like Bobby Fischer. Unfortunately, it just seemed like everybody and his brother had a special defense to one E4. So if I played E4 and they played a Sicilian, and I was expected to know the Najdorf, the Dragon, the classical Sicilian, Rousers, Sveshnikovs, I mean, all kinds of things. And if I play E4 and they played the Alekhine, I was expected to know, you know, the four pawns attack and everything else. So all of that chess theory that I had to learn just basically drove me away from one E4. So, okay, so I went to D4. Well, that wasn't much better either, because then everybody had a specialist defense to one D4. They played a Nimzo, a Queen's Gambit declined, a Benoni, a Benko Gambit, even sometimes Budapest. So I thought, well, okay, I'll keep going all the way over to the edge of the board. And I started playing one C4, okay? So again, it wasn't like I had some vast strategic ideas about my opening. It was just that I was trying to avoid losing or getting a worse position in 10, 12, 15 moves, whatever. So C4 started to become a favorite, and somehow in my mind I began to think that one move was connected with another. There was a connection with my moves. So what was I trying with C4? Well, one of the things I was trying to do was to build a fortress. I was trying to play knight F3, G3, bishop G2, castles, knight C3, and just have a saved king, and I wouldn't get checkmated either on F2 or on F7. Okay. But then I started thinking that, okay, well, one C4 protects the D5 square. And wouldn't it be great if, for example, my opponents were to play C5, G3, G6, bishop G2, bishop G7, knight C3. Aha! This is very interesting. I'm controlling the square D5. Aha! I have a strategical plan of controlling the square D5. That's cool. And let's just say my opponent continued in the same manner, knight C6. Okay. So far everything's okay. And I thought, okay, I've got this bishop on G2. It makes a very nice impression going all the way down the long diagonal. How can I improve that bishop? And I got to thinking that, well, one of the ways I could do that, one of the ways I could improve this bishop is to get rid of this knight. So I started thinking, okay, let me play a3. And what's my idea? Okay, let's suppose my opponent would play a6. I play rook b1. Now we can see the makings of my idea. My idea is that strategically, I want to play b4, force a swap, and then I want to play b5 and to try to create a targeted weakness here on the b7 pawn. Okay, let's go back for a moment and let's try something else. Let me try c4 and give my opponent a different approach. Let's say my opponent would play e5. Okay, I would play g3. My opponent, for argument's sake, would play knight c6, bishop g2. Let's say my opponent would play g6, play knight c3, bishop g7, and now rook b1. Okay, so I'm thinking that, you know, I've got this diagonal. I got the potential of establishing an outpost for my knight. I like that very much. I want to play b4, b5, and open the diagonal. So a lot of my opponents would play, for argument's sake, let's say d6, or even, let's say, a5. Let's give them a5. I play a3. Let's give them d6. I would play b4, takes, takes. Let's give them f5. Let me kick, knight. Let's say I play here. Let's say they play here. Let's say I play here. Castle. And this was a very standard position that I would reach. And I got to play more and more games like this where I was literally using move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all based on a strategic plan of occupying this diagonal. Sometimes in this type of position, I would play queen b3 and c5 check, b6, trying to create weaknesses here. Sometimes I would play knight e1, knight c2, knight b4. You know, if I could get establish the d5 outpost. Sometimes I would play bishop g5 to eliminate this knight, so once again I could establish this outpost. So suddenly I was starting to play with strategic ideas literally from move 1 throughout the game. The following game, and I'm going to ask yourselves to choose an opening where we can talk about a strategic idea that really develops from move 1. In this game, which was played in 1979, oh my goodness, I was playing Grandmaster Tony Miles. And Tony, at that time, was really the leader of British chess in the UK, I should say. And he became one of the top grandmasters in the world, and one of the first grandmasters of the UK. I think he was the first. And he led a whole slew of grandmasters from Dr. John Nunn, Jonathan Mestel, Jonathan Spielman, Raymond Keane. Later came Nigel Short. Later after him, after Nigel Short, came Mickey Adams, and so on. Now the strange thing about Tony at this time, Tony had a universal answer for every opening move. Whether you played e4, d4, c4, he played b6. He played b6. He's just playing b6 on move 1 against everything and doing incredibly well. One of them you'll recall is that he beat Anatoly Karpov, I think, with e4, a6, followed by b5. The improvement of b6 is to get the advanced pawn to b5. Anyway, so we're setting up for the game. The organizer, whatever, is doing his telephone thing, his mic thing, everybody get ready, and the gong sounds. And I realize that I'm going to be facing b6, and my strategic insight into the chess opening is going to be messed up by this guy's move 1, b6. So I play g3. So I just finished playing g3, pressing the clock, writing down my move, and Tony leans across the board and he whispers, "I love these moral victories." Hey man, you're beating the whole world with b6. I'm not standing in line, So he thinks for a minute or two, and he pops out with e5. Well, quick as a flash, I knew what to do. And now I had my English, and I got my strategic concepts. So c4, g3. Now, certainly what I was doing to people, this whole knight c3, bishop g2, calmly just developing my pieces and then strategically looking to expand on the queen side and control the center, was not lost on Tony Miles. So he tried to trick me by taking me out of my, I took him out of his comfort zone on move 1. On move 2, he tries to take me out of mine. And we get this position. Well, here I can't do my knight c3, rook b1 routine. Knight c3, he's just going to, if I go knight c3 attacking his pawn, he's simply going to advance it. So I had to be flexible and to change my strategy. So in this position, at this time as black, I played several openings, including the Caro-Kann and including the French. So I took some of my experience from those defenses and applied it to my approach in this position. I figured I should attack his pawn with d4. And I was thinking that if he were to capture my pawn, besides the fact that I could simply recapture with the queen, new variation, I would play knight here, knight to f3, and I transpose into a kind of a Caro-Kann position where actually I've just got an extra move. And after I recapture this pawn with my knight, we'll have an isolated queen pawn position. I was perfectly happy playing against that. And if he played e4, which was his choice, then we kind of get a French defense type of structure. And in a normal French, my pawn would be on e3, and my bishop would be blocked. But this isn't a normal French. In fact, my bishop isn't blocked at all. This one is. So I've got to figure out a way of breaking him out. I played f3. Okay. So now, if black was to capture on f3, I would recapture with the knight, and I'd be very, very happy. Because, and I talk about this a lot, and I do this consciously. I actually verbalize internally to myself at the chessboard. I do a running count in my head of the number of units that are not on their original square. So the way I would say is that in this position, white's much better. Why? Because he's ahead in the time count, or rather, white has more development. Strictly speaking, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 to 1. I've developed my army faster than my opponent, who has almost everything on the original square except for the pawn on d5. So I would say I have a huge advantage. And the reason for that is because black has basically pushed his pawn once, twice, and played 3 moves with his pawn. So I would really have been happy if Tony had captured on f3. He played f5, which is the natural follow-up to his previous play. Strategically speaking, he's trying to keep this outpost, he's trying to keep his pawn on e4 to discourage my development of the knight. Okay, so here we have to think about the position from a strategic point of view, because that's the nature of the class, to think of strategy. These pawns make a nice impression, and we shouldn't overlook that fact. They do make a nice impression, but your job is to look at your trumps, okay? So since you're playing the side of the good guy here, that's me, what are the trumps? Or put it another way, what is the downside of black structure? Anybody care to tell me? Sir?
Too advanced.
And when the pawns are so advanced, that could be good, but it could be bad, so they leave weak squares in their wake, right?
Black squares.
They're weak black squares. And specifically, this square. This square is a very weak square, and we can imagine if we could post a knight there, not only would it be attacking this pawn, but it wouldn't be very easy for black to get rid of that knight. Okay, so immediately we start to imagine a strategy. We could bring our knight to c3. We could bring our queen to b3. We could bring our knight to h3 and f4. Ah, we've got a problem. The moment we bring our knight to f4, what's the drawback of having the knight on f4? From white's point of view, what would be a drawback? If I could take that knight and just lift it up and stick it on f4, what would be the drawback of the knight on f4? Not much of a drawback, I agree, but maybe the view of the bishop on c1 would say, hey, you know, like maybe you forgot about me. Ah, so we start to think again. Okay, because we want all of our pieces good all of the time. So we might start to think, I understand, we're going to go knight c3, queen b3, provoke the knight to f6, play our bishop to g5, then stick our knight on f4, right? So we get the bishop in front of the knight. Our knight is going to be on f4. It's going to be wonderful. Okay. So we continue. Knight h3, knight c6, castles. There were other moves, bishop e7. Notice that with this move, bishop e7, it's kind of a strange little move. Like, what's up with that bishop e7? Well, here, Tony was reluctant to allow me, after the normal-looking knight f6, to allow me to simply allow the pin. So he's being coy. He plays bishop e7. That's fine. Knight c3. It wasn't really any better move than knight f6. Bishop g5, bishop e6, knight here, bishop here, and we can see that black is defending his d5 pawn as best he can, and as long as he can maintain this pawn on e4, he's going to be happy. Okay, so here again, now we have to switch our strategic thinking. I mean, my plan had been to put as much pressure on d5 as possible. I can see that in the near future, my opponent's going to play h6, bishop takes will be forced. Then my pawn on d4 is going to be weakened. I'm going to be obliged to play e2, e3. So I play e3 at once. My opponent castles. And now, in a funny sense, I've kind of hit a wall, right? Like, I've done basically the best I can, And if I continue with a move, for example, like bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen b3, attacking this pawn on d5, well, he can chase my queen away, for one thing, with the move knight a5 if he doesn't have anything better. So I need to change strategic plans. Any suggestions? Pardon me? Yeah, rook b1, b4, b5, yeah. a3, okay, but I'm a little bit slow. We can imagine that, for example, after a3, h6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, b4. I am setting up for a queen b3 type of move, but with his bishop on the f6 square, he can defend d5 once more with the move knight e7. So one of the things that we need to do when we think strategically, when we're good enough to stop just thinking about tactics, but we think strategically, one of the things we constantly have to do is talk to our pieces. How you doing? Okay. How you doing? Okay, okay. Not so okay, not so okay, okay, okay. Not so okay. Bishop on g2 is blocked. So I take. Sorry, I want to explain this for a moment. So my idea is that this bishop on g2 needs a new outlook on life. And I'm thinking that because I've chased my opponent's bishop back to the f7 square, it's going to pop out on h3. I'll attack this pawn, or after I exchange, I'll attack the square e6. So I traded anticipating that if my opponent were to recapture with his f-pawn, I would improve my bishop, which is blocked. So from Tony's point of view, he said, okay, well, I'm not going to allow you a good bishop, and I'm going to improve mine. Bishop f7 now has a longer reach. Bishop g6. Okay. So again, what kind of thing should I be doing now? Suggestions from the class. Does anybody like the advanced d5? If you don't all shout at once if you like the advanced d5. I didn't like the advanced d5 for the very simple reason that after the knight jumps to e5, thanks to the pawn on e4, he's got two beautiful outposts, potential outposts for his knight, so the move d5 actually sucks. That's a terrible move. He would just jump to the center and he'd be very happy. On the other hand, I'm very unhappy about my opponent's structure. This looks like a beautiful pawn chain from h7 to g6, and I think I need to break up Black's team, so I played the move g3, g4 to break up the team. So I'm thinking in my mind's eye that after some trades happen, I'll end up, if I could just take this pawn f5 off the board and take this pawn g4 off the board, I'll end up controlling e6, and that'll be very good for me. So takes. I should explain what's going on here. So I took on f6 with the idea that if he recaptures with the bishop, I wanted to play queen takes g4, and his pawn on e4 is weak. Maybe I would step back once, Julian.
Why didn't you play bishop takes f4 before c4?
I beg your pardon?
Why didn't you play bishop takes f6 before c4?
Bishop takes f. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so I played g4. Julian makes a very sensible, ask a very sensible question. What about takes, and now g4? So the idea is that by playing in this fashion, I've reduced my opponent's options, right? Well, one of the things I was worried about was a kind of a piece sacrifice that, let me see if I can reconstruct my thoughts for a moment. So let's imagine a piece sacrifice that would go, let's say, like this. Takes, and let's say I go into the corner, and let's say he takes my knight. I take, and he goes something like this. Okay? So let's say my knight moves somewhere. I can go to h5, I can go to g2, I can go to e2. Let's just for the moment say knight e2, and let's imagine this. And probably this is good for me, but just at the time, I had this kind of weird feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was actually pretty good for him. I saw in my mind's eye that maybe black could play moves like queen d5 or possibly bishop d5, and it was going to be very awkward for me to play bishop g2 in the face of f3. So maybe this is a good sacrifice, maybe this is a good position for me, but that at least is the reason why I didn't play bishop f6. I didn't want to give him that possibility. And maybe it's not good for him. But it's a good question. Played g4. He took, I took. And again, at this point, I'm very hopeful that this pawn on e4 is going to be very weak, that I'm just going to play queen takes g4, bishop g2, and collect. He took on h3. I took on e7. He took on e7. I played queen g4. Okay. So kind of funny things are going on. I'm not 100% too sure, but I like the way I like the situation as it exists. In some cases, he has to be a little bit careful that I don't play a move like knight d5 and end up occupying f6. In other cases, he has to be a little careful that I don't play moves like knight takes h3, knight g5, and simply slurp the pawn on e4. Let's see what he played. He played bishop c4, attacking my rook. Played rook f2. He played rook f5, with a very dangerous threat of rook g5, right away. Let's say that was a visual. I got a visual impression of the rook on g5. I didn't like it one bit. I played knight takes h3 to defend against rook g5. He played rook h5. And now his idea is pretty clear. He wants to play bishop to e6 and slurp my knight. If my knight were to move, he's going to play rook to g5. Now the game has stopped being strategical. Now it's damn tactical. And what do you think I did? I'll give you a clue. His threat, one of the threats I have to deal with is a future rook g5, and I want to stop rook g5 for good as a threat. So let's just consider what I can do. We understand that bishop e6 should scare the bejesus out of us, right? So if I move my queen, for example, to g3, then, for example, after bishop e6, Knight comes to f4, rook g5. Thank you very much, I lose the game. So it's certainly not a queen move. If I play knight takes e4, bishop e6 is going to cost me a piece, so that's just not very good. Julian?
If you play knight takes e4,
Yes?
and he plays bishop e6,
Yes?
can you play
Knight f6 check, queen takes. If I take the queen, he'll take my queen. Oopsie daisy, I lost a piece.
knight takes e4.
Okay, let's have a quick look-see. Knight takes e4, oops. Bishop e6. And again, if I play knight f6 check, possibly he can just move his king, but I was thinking this was quite simple. Queen takes, I can take his rook, but he'll take my rook with a check. If we trade, oops, I don't mean to do that. If I take his queen, he will take mine, and I'm simply a piece down. Okay, I have a pawn or something for it, but it won't be sufficient compensation. So unfortunately, I showed you the move I played. I played rook g2. So this is a very nice move because, first of all, it covers any future ideas of rook g5, but it does so with a tempo. I am now threatening to capture his rook. Queen takes h5, thanks to the pin on the g file. Rook h4. This move is intended to defend the pawn on e4. Queen g3. Rook f8. With the very big threat, of course, of playing rook to f3. So, what do I do now? Knight f4 is an excellent move. Knight f4 is an excellent move. Just blocking his rook from coming to f3. But here I started to get a little greedy. In my mind's eye, I sure wanted to win this pawn on e4. Knight g5. That's a pretty nasty tempo against his rook on h4. So he played rook h5. Yeah? Okay. So what did I do now? Well, one thing I would really like to do is simply take this pawn. If I take this pawn with the knight on c3, I have a slight problem that after bishop to d5, I may have some regrets about my rook on g2. If I take with the other knight, also very, very excellent move, the advantages of taking with this other knight is that after knight takes, bishop d5, at least I have this move, knight takes d5. So maybe I should take the pawn on e4. Julie, have a good idea for white here? Pardon me? You want to play d5 and possibly take one bit? Well, here I had a more greedy thought. Yeah, that was my greedy thought. My greedy thought is that this bishop is actually kind of weird. On the one hand, it controls the square f1, which is kind of regrettable, and I definitely don't want to get checkmated by an idea like queen here and queen here. On the other hand, this square d5 would be very attractive. Imagine my knight could jump to d5 and then jump to f4. Well, that rook would really be rather ugly. So I began to think that perhaps, just perhaps, that the bishop on c4 was overloaded. So I said, why don't you move your bishop, Tony? Please find a better square for your bishop. And b3, he moved his bishop to d3, protecting his knight. So now I have given up my ambition of capturing this pawn. Instead, I decided that I had a higher calling in trying to cull that rook. I went knight d5, queen d7, knight f4. Give me the rook. He played rook h6, and I played rook d1. The idea of rook d1 isn't that I am not really that interested in winning a pawn. Actually, it's not true. I'm always interested in winning a pawn. But I really wanted to sidestep any tactic of knight takes d4, e takes d4, queen takes d4 with a very unfortunate check. So I chose the square d1 to get out of the tactic, but at the same time to perhaps worry him that I might one day win a pawn. Rook f5, and this is actually a very fine move I believe I played at this moment. h4. This really pounds home the problem that black is having. Remember how that rook, when it went to f5 and then it went to h5, was so threatening and scary and powerful, has suddenly become this meek little mouse that is trapped on this horrible square h6, and it has no further role in the game. So here I was really starting to think that, life is getting very, very good, not just for ideas like knight h7 and knight g6, but other ideas like knight g6 and queen check, sometimes combined with e5. Or put it another way, imagine that my knight, this knight on f4 goes to e6, this knight goes backwards for a bad reason, and I get to go queen b8 check. So things were really looking good. Another idea from white's point of view is if I can also bring this knight on g5 to e6, sometimes I can go h5, and even I can end up sacrificing my queen, perhaps, on the square g6. So, unfortunately, from black's point of view, black is almost now, in a strategically speaking, in a stranglehold. He's been completely outdone, and threats galore all over the board. He played knight takes d4, which was a desperate attempt. Check, king h2, queen e5. So here he has some kinds of funny tricks. Not too sure what exactly they are, based on various pins. So like, you know, if I take here, that maybe he could take with a check. But I had a very good move here that just cemented everything. Knight h3. And again, this horrible situation with his rook on h6. I could now be threatening to capture on d3, and sometimes I'm even threatening to play h5. He played queen f6, I played h5. He released, and I played here. Did he resign? I'm not sure. Just a second. No, I think he played g5. Okay, here I have a pretty simple win. Rook comes here. So my idea is as simple as if he takes my knight, I want to take with check, followed by knight f4. And if he allows me, I want to take on f5, followed by rook d5, and capture this pawn on g5. Rook takes, check, knight g2, rook takes, resigns. Strategic play, strategic ideas.